James Sanders Jr. to introduce the evening and get the conversation started. Thank you very much.
Well, all right. Welcome to Harlem. As a guy from Queens, I have to speak kind of quick because my passport is going to run out pretty quickly. I want to do a couple of things, and I want to sit down. I want to first say that where else can you talk about reparations, the proper place, but in Black Mecca itself, Harlem, USA? What better time to speak about reparations than Harlem Week? And is there a better place to speak about it than the Schomberg? I want to thank the good people of the Schomberg for understanding their relationship to our struggle, to our history, and for allowing us to be here. My friends, not only should you feel welcome, but you should feel part of history. You can be able to say, or you will be able to say, that you were there. I would be remiss if I did not thank the chair of the Black Caucus of the state of New York, who is going to speak shortly. I would be remiss if we did not speak to them. To all of the elected officials in the audience, you are certainly welcome. Assembly members Gibbs, Assembly Member Anderson, I'm sure some more will walk in here. And I'm not having my glasses. Oh, Lord have mercy, I got it. Always wear your glasses. Always. Otherwise, you will be Inez. Of course, Madam Inez, whose district we are in, our Assembly Member, Inez Dickens, who is here. And have I missed anyone else? Ooh. Have I missed? Okay now, I don't want to get beat up later. I want to thank, of course, the people. You're going to be handed out cards, my friends. A couple of home. We're going to be handed out cards. If you have a question, please put it on the card. You're going to be handed out cards. I believe that somebody has a card. Anybody? She just happens to have the cards, and you should be handing them out to these people now as you can. Or somebody from my team should be helping. Three things, and then I'm gonna stop. And I'm going to bring on the next person. Three things I want you to remember, and if you remember nothing else from this, then you did right with these three things. Reconcilable versus irreconcilable. The perfect is the enemy of the good. And last but never least, save some energy for your enemies. Reconcilable versus irreconcilable. There are two types of problems in the world. There are those that are reconcilable, that you can work out, and those that you can't. I would suggest to you that everybody in this audience, whatever your position is reconcilable. You could work this out. There are those outside of this room that your position is irreconcilable. Save some of your energy to deal with them. Perfect is the energy, is the enemy of the good. There's never a perfect bill. There's no such thing as a perfect bill. Never has, never will be. But if it's a vehicle that can get you to where you need to be, then take that one, my friends. Take that one. Last but never least, save some energy for your enemies. We are really good at beating each other up. Nobody does it better. We are really bad at confronting our enemies. Part of it is because we're spending too much time beating each other up. Can I encourage you to save some of your energy for your enemies? But I'm going to tell you about a person who's no enemy to any of us, and that, of course, is the chair of the Black Caucus, Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus of the New York State, I almost said Assembly, Legislature. And that, of course, is our Assembly Member, Szilagyi, who is coming out here, and she will give you greeting as she sees fit. Thank you very much for being here. You're part of history. Let's make it.
Greetings, everyone.
Reparations.
The reason that we are here is because of him. He unites us, he collaborates with us, and he said we have to do something in Harlem, really the mecca of Black culture. So I really have to thank him for congregating us here today. Once again, my name is Assemblywoman Mikhail Salaj. I represent the 22nd Assembly District, which is in Long Island, so if his passport's about to expire, mine is going, so right? And I just want to say thank you. You know, some may argue that the past is the past and that we should move on. But we cannot move on if the echoes of history are still ringing in our ears, especially the millions who are still suffering, whether it's the economic wealth gap, the lack of housing, the lack of, or the giant health disparities that we have here in the state. And so we're having not just a national conversation about reparations, but we're also having a local conversation about reparations. Because in life, what they say, you think globally but act locally. And so here in our communities, we have an opportunity to support the work that was done in Albany. When we pushed the Reparation and Remedies Bill, it was about making sure that we unite Black voices and start talking about the conversation of how we could begin healing our communities, but also making sure that our communities are compensated. Because we know that our nation, this state is built on our backs. And so I thank you so much for this opportunity to have this conversation. There's a lot of misinformation going on. But I could not, first I want to thank the sponsors, thank the Schomberg Center, but I also want to thank my colleagues in the Black, Hispanic, Puerto Rican, Asian caucus. Really give them a round of applause. You know, we are influential because we are united. We are influential because we are united together as one body. Regardless of our differences, we stand shoulder to shoulder because we know that we have work to do in Albany, and we're getting it done. So I thank my colleagues. We would not be talking about reparation if it wasn't for the caucus. So I thank every member from Buffalo all the way down to Montauk. I thank them for being a part of this. And I also thank my colleagues for coming here today. It's Friday night. I'm surprised you're not having fun, right? And so once again, I thank you all for attending, and I look forward to a great conversation.
Is Senator Claire in the house yet? We clear? All right, well, we're getting there. My friends, now we are going to have a conversation of conversations, and of course we have to have a moderator who is the most moderating of moderators that we can find. And that, of course, is Gail Lewis. Not only does she do this on her webcast, and I hope that she tells you about it, but she does this, and she had volunteered to be here because she knows how important this is to you, and to all of us. So without further ado, our moderator for the evening, Gail Lewis.
Good evening, Schomberg. This evening with you. The first part of this evening, just to give you a little heads up of how this is running, is we are going to have an academic panel with two panelists, and they will explain a little bit of what reparations are and how they apply, a little bit of the history behind reparations. And then the second part, we will have some local electeds come up and explain to us a little bit about what they're doing as far as reparations go. As Senator Sanders said, if you have a question at any time, just raise your hand. Someone will come around with an index card. Just write your question down. We'll keep collecting the questions as we go along this evening, and then we will answer them at the end of the panel. So how about we get started? Sound like a plan?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to take a seat and start the panel. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce two of our academic panelists for this evening. The first, Dr. Aaron Mayer. Dr. Mayer? As Dr. Mayer is having a seat, I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. He is a retired New York State public health epidemiological spatial analyst. Now that's a lot of words with a lot of syllables, so he will explain exactly what that is and how his study of the environment and environmental conditions applies here tonight to reparations. So it's very exciting to have him on the panel. Yes, you can clap for him again. He brings with him just an entire wealth of knowledge. He was the first African American president of the Sierra Club, and I will let him explain exactly the importance behind that. Additionally, he has been in the environmental space for decades, working tirelessly to improve our environment. He has been part of the Environmental Justice Program. He's trained at Rhode Island's Naval Education and Training Center, and his list of, I feel as if I can stand up here all night and go down the list, so I will let him speak. So he is our first panelist, and yes, you can clap for him one more time. In addition to Dr. Mayer, we also have someone who is not a stranger, I could say, to the Schombergs, and that to the Schomberg Center, and that is K.C. Matthews. K.C., come on out. Again, he's got cheers from the audience because you know him. He is one of your own. He is Deputy Director of the Schomberg Center for Research in Black Culture, right here at the New York Public Library. He's not new. And again, his list of accolades goes down as you wouldn't believe. He and I are both from Jamaica, Queens. Literally grew up blocks away from each other, we found out, so I feel as if he is kin. Not only in academia, but also in the fact that he is part of history here at the Schomberg. So let me have a seat and let's get started, shall we?
Yes.
So good evening.
Good evening.
It's great to have you both on the panel. This first part of the panel, as we said, deals with more of a historical, academic discussion of reparations. To both of you, first of all, what are reparations?
Well, academically, you can look at reparations as, they say, a settling of accounts. We see these in the form of, say, treaties at the end of the World War, like World War I, the Treaty of Versailles, holding the aggressive party accountable, an airing of the wrongs, and also the damages and those impacted, the stories. So it's sort of like a trial. I mean, in one sense, we also in World War II, not only do we have a similar type of treaty ending World War II, again, holding an aggressor accountable, but also the victim statement. But even something historic and significant came out of that because the wrongs were so egregious that a judicial mechanism was created, the trials of Nuremberg, and the International Criminal Court for the first time came into being to actually hold a state power accountable for the treatment of populations, subpopulations, and minority populations within their borders, but also outside of them.
So if I can interrupt. So what I'm hearing is a few things. First, you say damages. So the first thing I think of when I hear damages is, you're walking down the street, someone hits you, you sue them, you get damages. Is that the same idea historically that we're talking about now? That's my first question. And secondly, what you're saying, from what I'm understanding, is there is a historical idea behind reparations. So this is not the first time that we're asking for reparations.
Absolutely, and it is, people like to focus on, especially when it comes to African Americans and people of color, they often look at the money first, but they ignore the harm. First comes the harm, the impact, the damage to the people first, and then comes the redress and accountability, and then the negotiation of how do you repair that harm. So, I want to be clear in the national conversation as it deals with people, but even right now in the climate debate, they talk about damages and loss. First world nations, Northern Caucasus nations, which is basically Europe, the G20, they talk about, well, we're not paying for it, but the fact of the matter is the damages are not just only in the terms of climate, but the actual real impact on frontline nations, and as they say, real harm. Island nations right now are suffering, as they say, the impact. So we tend to look at, when it's people of color looking at cost and financial impacts and accountability, meaning that you know you committed a crime or you did something wrong or you damaged something, and then, you don't want to pay for it. And so, just cutting to the chase so the layperson can just get a sense of it, but also.
I'm going to add something to that.
Go ahead.
And please jump in.
No, it's right. So remember that we're also at a period where we're talking about things in a modern framework where we talk about restorative justice. And restorative justice is not always monetary. So I'm going to add another word to our discussion. Let's add reckoning.
Yes.
Right? So reckoning is recognizing what happened. And to tell you the truth, that seems to be the hardest thing for most Americans to come to grips with. What actually happened? We're still literally looking at parts of our country trying to negate what we know is the actual history of slavery. So reckoning so first there's harm,
Yes.
then there has to be reckoning. And reparations might actually attach something to it, something tangible. But there has to be a reckoning and an understanding of what actually occurred.
And so let's take another step back. You said first there is harm. So just to draw a roadmap for everyone, the harm is fill in the blank.
The harm is transatlantic slavery and the foundations of what we call modern Western finance and capitalism. Modern nation states rise out of the wealth that was created out of transatlantic slavery. The counting houses were revolutionized. The assurance industries were revolutionized. The wealth and commodity sectors and how they were counted were revolutionized. So these things were all these institutions, these growth, these massive points of wealth for Western nations were on the backs of black bodies. And the harm done, and again, this is not only just the wealth side, but what was the permission, what were the entities? Everything was involved, everything from church and state, because folks don't realize something called the asiento that came out of the Catholic Church, which gave the permission of commodity and selling of souls, i.e. classifying people of color as savages, and those who were not white, and those who were white Christian nations, as they say, in the eyes of God. And so the harms upon which these original sin began is in the as a trafficking in and property in human flesh, with specifically African peoples of the continent of Africa.
And we have lots of folks who would say, okay, but that was so long ago.
That was
So-
my next
so this
question.
must
this
have-
is
So
2023.
this must have ended. But the reality is, and I was showing some folks around today to the exhibition that we have here called Marking Time, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration. Parts of our system of mass incarceration, our policing, is all part of this same legacy. And I understand that, remember, most of us who went to public schools, whether they were in Queens or not, we didn't really learn this part of history. So a lot of us are learning it as adults. We're sharing this information. So remember, part of the reason why we're here is that there was legislation to create a commission where maybe folks in the state can learn a little bit more about this. And we, even as adults and scholars, you're a scholar, I'm not, can honestly learn about this. But it's the idea that there are still parts of this legacy that are with us today. We just don't understand the root. Mass incarceration is part of that root. Problems we have with the police state, that is part of that root.
And you mentioned restorative justice. How does that fit in right here?
Well, it's critical when we talk about what are the big gaps. And the biggest gap.
Is that part of reparations?
Right, the biggest gaps absolutely is, the loss, and the loss of knowledge, the loss of wealth. And, these things right now, I do something called learning journeys right now with academics, scholars, and politicians, where I take them out into places in the environment and sites around the state and around the country of lost African American heritage. Not too many people, for example, know that in 1846, the first black resistance, the first voting rights suffrage was not in the South. It predated the Civil War. It's 1846 in the state of New York, where African Americans, led by a gentleman by the name of Willis Hodges and a whole bunch of other African-American leaders and civil rights leaders and abolitionists. Remember again, Willis Hodges out of Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and Weeksville, Brooklyn, blacks in 1846. They band together to fight for the right to vote. New York State created a property condition of having to have $250 in order for you to be eligible to vote. They gave the yeoman white
That
the
was
right to
in
vote.
what year? $250?
1846.
So that's like
But the point
thousands
is,
upon thousands of dollars.
the liberation point was that in allyship with Garrett Smith, a white from upstate New York outside of Syracuse, he gave up 3,000 acres of land. And so for 3,000 for a population of 3,000 people of color, 3,000 households of color, 150 acres for each of those families. And so there's a deed book in the state capitol, state archives, that not only lists the particulars of the people who received the right to vote by having these parcels, but the townships that in the parcel lots where they were located. There are 12 areas. In fact, one is a place called Ray Brook. Ray Brook was one of the places which were part of the parcels for blacks having the right to vote throughout the state. Ray Brook was not only a liberation point, but now it's a place of mass incarceration, to draw a final point. The irony of ironies, in 1846, the right to vote, and now in 2023, a place, of incarceration.
A place of freedom now turned into a place of incarceration.
Absolutely. So, and let's go back even further, because we really want to talk about liberty and freedom, right? The liberty conspiracy that gave rise to this nation. Malcolm X of Harlem talked about the ballot or the bullet, but how many here know that the first person to take a bullet for liberty, all people being equal in the eyes of the Creator, was a gentleman by the name of Crispus Attucks from Boston, Mass. The first person to take a bullet. So the arc of the ballot of the bullet goes right to the foundation of this nation, that black men stood up for liberty, right? So you go down to Francis Carter in Lower Manhattan, you see that show called Spy on TV. All the spies are whites, but actually most of the spies during the Revolutionary War were also black and white. In fact, it was within the blacks that they could move free, because everybody believed that blacks were slave and servile, but that was where the massive amount, we were the intelligence service of that era. So when you talk about the foundation of this nation, not only anchored on slavery, but when the slavery conspiracy around liberty came about, where they said, something, the whites in the 13th colony, we didn't do this. It was King George is responsible for slavery. And they were right. King George was crown colonies. He was the architect. You can put it right on King George. But a funny thing happened after the Revolution. Now that you got all this land, and even blacks fought as Continental Line troops as well as militiamen as well, right from Lexington and Concord to the 1st Rhode Island, which was a partial black regiment out of Rhode Island because they couldn't meet the population, black and indigenous Continental Line troops. But when the battle for freedom in this nation was birthed and won, when it came for land bounties, when it came for them to, as I said, be amongst the first citizens, they were put back into slavery, and they were not given those boundaries. So when we talk about the foundations for everything from liberty to land and life, our people were the first and the foundation. And so the damage and the harm is long in institutions. So this is why the history is critical, and why this panel, this conversation is critical, because we don't want to get fallen in the trap of just talking about money. We want to recover that history and that knowledge, and that's something that's very powerful about this conversation.
There's 2 threads there, thank you, that I'd like to pull. First, you said that it was institutional, so I'd like for you both to speak to institutional. And second, so we've talked a lot about the history here of American slavery, the history in the Americas. However, America was not the only place, another argument, America was not the only place, is not the only place where we had slavery. Slavery was, amongst other cultures, throughout time. So why is this different? So both institutional and that historical part where American slavery wasn't the only slavery that we saw. Can you speak to those?
I want to mention something that has happened in the last couple of months here at the Schomberg Center. Literally just this year, we've had delegations from Brazil, from the Netherlands, from the UK, because all of those places are also going through this very same reckoning. So in a lot of our conversations, we perhaps haven't been using the word reparations, but we are talking about repair, restorative justice. And there's a lot of this going on globally, and I mention it because quite often when you're sitting in the North American bubble, we believe that we're the only ones who've suffered, and we don't really pay attention to what's happening globally. So as New York State is talking about this, please understand, this is being discussed globally. We literally have people who are planning museums and expositions and centenaries and looking for ways of memorializing what happened, coming to grips with it, sharing the education, and repairing. So again, reparations may be an American word, but it's happening in many, many other places. And I mention it because, folks, that means we have allies.
Yes.
Right?
And it's a very powerful contextual point, but let's not, and as I said, the academic side, and as I say, the angry black scholar side is that, that we still have to also not while acknowledging that broader context of not acknowledging that the slave boat and transatlantic slave trade, America, the Caribbean, and Latin America, at the end of the day, they try to use these national and regional divisions to try to, again, minimize the impact of that was a massive institution, economic institution. And no matter whether the slave boat landed in the U.S., the Caribbean, or Latin America, we are part of that greater diaspora. You can call yourself Hispanic, but go out and get yourself an ancestry DNA and you see Mother Africa's markers along with the indigenous markers within your blood. The same thing with Latin America. You can speak Haitian or French Creole, that doesn't make you less of a descendant of the African diaspora ripped from Africa, from West Africa, and brought to the Americas. And don't talk about, there was often the movement of slaves between North America to Jamaica to punish slaves. Because they said, well, listen, we haven't, beaten enough of the black off you. We're going to send you down to Jamaica. And if you haven't died here, we're going to make sure you die in Jamaica or in Brazil.
But let's address the institution. Because almost all of us are part of institutions that benefited from slavery. Our religious institutions, our universities, lots of our state governments, businesses, individuals. So when you hear, in the popular media or social media that, okay, but I had nothing to do with it.
That's another
And
argument, yes.
that is an argument that we hear time and time again, but almost all of the institutions have done something. So there was an interesting discussion here recently. It was just, casual. Okay, so what do you think would actually happen first in this country? An actual reckoning of what was done, the harm that was done in slavery, or just paid a big bill? And you know what? It's an interesting discussion, because America has been known to write a check without ever admitting any wrong. So,
well, I'm glad you raised that, because I think that, when we play the common and the popular politics of today where everybody has an opinion, you know what they say about everybody having an opinion, the fact of the matter is we need to have the institutions. This is why the conversation at the state level with the governor is important. New York State having this conversation now, in my opinion, is more important than California, even though slavery hit the whole nation, because California was part of the mid-19th century expansion and exploitation and land theft from indigenous as well. But again, it was part of a system. But New York was one of the founding 13 colonies. And so the what they call finance, insurance, and real estate industries are the bedrock of Wall Street, the bedrock of financial institutions. It's the bedrock of the wealth of the state. And people don't realize that it is also the bedrock also of slavery. So for example, we hear about this great park called Alana, which we talk about the arts and we celebrate the arts in New York State. So it's a beautiful restored park, and everybody of color in this state, in fact, every New York, every American should go to visit Alana, because you can see what slavery can build. The Cole family that built that state, he was the son of a wealthy insurance baron, and the insurance company was called Aetna. And so there are companies to this day that have not and should, as part of as they say, a restoration and reclaiming. Yes, I would say, listen, getting those records to the National Archives and now Library of Congress, because these folks insured plantations, they insured black bodies, okay, they insured slave ships. Okay, this is the foundation of our insurance, and some of these old giants are anchored in the blood money of transatlantic slavery. And again, anchored in New York State. So we have historic institutions that people go to, and they look at the Hudson River school paintings of art and don't know that the wealth that financed that is on the back of black lives.
So it's, obviously, it's important here in New York State, what we're
Oh,
doing.
absolutely. This is New York. Listen, you go to the Met, Hudson River School is a serious cultural. We talk about slavery in everything that it touches. And so when we're having this record, it's not only scholarship and economics, you need to have a full accounting. And this is one of the geniuses about the Nuremberg trials and the Holocaust. You export all aspects of what Germany did to a people.
So that wasn't just I don't want to say just, but it wasn't only the murder. It was everything that surrounded that as well.
Absolutely.
So it was holistic in its in the way they went about it.
And it gets
Actual trial.
It gets to that point when people say, well, this has nothing to do with me. My ancestors were not slaveholders. My ancestors, we're all money here and there. At the end of the day, as they say, when you take my heritage and you take my name, you take all that comes with it. When you become a citizen in the United States, when any immigrant comes in, they have to learn about the revolution. You have to learn all the things what went into this country and the great power behind it, and own that and swear to it, swear fealty to it. It's not as if you did it, but you're taking on, when you become a part of a company, that liability of what that institution has created. So it's the legacy of what is an American. Okay, you can't carve that out. And it's not carved out because of when you emigrated here or if you were a refugee. The fact is that what does it mean to be American? What does it mean to, what is America? And so when you're stepping into that space, you step into all the national liabilities. Just like an immigrant going to Germany right now. If I or any black person or Hispanic or whatever goes to Germany right now, you are paying into the reparation funds that go right out to Holocaust victims, even though you may come from another nation or your people were never in the Nazi army.
And even though that happened, it didn't happen yesterday. It's in part of history.
At the end of the day, it's an amazing thing what America does with regards to time. Some people look at the Bible as a big real estate book and say, here's the birthright of a nation, of a people, of a state, and the Bible, we don't say that, the person's right to Israel is terminated or extinguished because the Bible is over, XYZ thousand years old. That's not the way history and liability and accountability work. And so folks need to realize that playing the game of time or whether or not you were here, ignoring the history of what is America. You have come to America. America didn't come to you. You're buying into the institutions and legacy, and you're benefiting from it. So at the end of the day, these are only arguments that people start to niggle with when they deal with people of color, specifically African Americans. And this is the thing, and this is where the scholarship, as they say, intersectionally, as well as interdisciplinary, across all sectors, must be leveraged. Because every ounce of fabric of what is America was stitched together by the thread of racism, white supremacy, but more importantly, slavery.
So as we're wrapping up this part of the panel, the academic side, I have two questions. First, what you said makes people anxious. What you said makes people uncomfortable. What you said about the historical, so my two questions. What you said about historical. So if my great-grandfather owned a plantation, does that mean I owe my neighbor an acre of my land, for example? So that's my first question. How can you work this out? And secondly, what are the implications of what we're doing here in New York for the entire country? So those are my last two questions.
So let me address history
Yes.
and how we learn part of it. So on your way out this evening, whether you've received it yet or not, if you'd like a copy, this was the original New York Times 1619 project. So Schomberg Center has the newspaper and the magazine insert for you. I always begin this with a disclaimer. This was a great piece of work, by the way, but I want people to understand that slavery did not begin in 1619. It horrifies me when people talk about, because we've now turned 1619 into a buzzword. This is available for all of you to take one on your way out. But this is part of the reckoning. We have to learn the history. And there's part of the history of the state of New York, which many of us are literally just beginning to fully understand. That is the reason for the legislation. So if you want to do your part, you have to be able to articulate and understand for yourself your role in it. And that's the part of, I think, American history that we all understand as people of color. America has a very short memory and doesn't want to learn its own history. So when we talk about African American history and culture, it is American history. The idea that it's not taught in our schools, that in and of itself is a crime. I'll leave it there.
And lastly, the implications for a national campaign.
Well, number one, and this is very, very, very powerful, in that we look at the conversation to this day and don't realize how old it is when they talk about Make America Great Again. When they talk about how we learn skills in slavery. But again, go back to the foundation and the Constitution of the Confederate States of America, the cornerstone speech. Alexander Stephens basically said, we hold the truth self-evident that the white man is superior to the black man. And that is the core and the battle cry of the Confederacy. When those folks are looking back with the Confederate battle flag that was marched in the Capitol on January 6th, it is the same old broken record. Okay, they haven't forgot. What is inconvenient for them is to be held accountable for what they did. So that's why now in former Confederate states, they are now making the study of slavery, the harms and crimes of humanity, the crimes against humanity done against African people, people of African descent. They want to strip it away from the books or call it job training. Call it, they don't use the N-word anymore, so they're going to use the W word, call it woke. So number one, don't ever give them power by giving up our words and our terms. Everybody stay woke, number one. There's nothing wrong with that. Knowledge is beautiful. But more importantly, let us be clear, what MAGA is the same as Alexander Stevenson, basically that old white supremacy speech of, again, whites being superior to blacks, and, as they say, an entitlement, a privilege that is their due right because they believe they are the founders of this nation. That's why I began to talk about who took the bullet for this nation first. So we must never lose sight of that. But, there are things that we can institutionally do right now. Where the states in the former Confederacy are saying they're going to wipe or sweep the history and pain and suffering of African Americans from their curriculum, then the state of New York, its regents, its academic institutions can say, well, listen, your high school degrees are null and void. You can't come to our universities, with us. So the thing is that you respond institutionally to institutionally. I'm proud of the current crop of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus, because I have been waiting for them all my life in the form of that, they are taking no prisoners in the sense of this. They're holding the truth self-evident that all of us are created equal in the eyes of the Lord, but more importantly, all of us have the right entitlement to, as they say, to be decent, loved and care for human beings within a civil society and a healthy democracy. And one of the things I think is beautiful is that they're living what Crispus Attucks took a bullet for liberty, for true liberty. And to take a final point on our president, again, we talk about the power of white privilege. We don't realize that, yes, Donald Trump is an immigrant, Bavarian and Scottish immigrants, whose wealth was created from having a near monopoly on GI bills, basically public tax dollars to build housing for veterans. But he put in racial covenants. And the immediate fiscal impact was that we could not generate intergenerational wealth by owning land and owning homes after services in World War II or Korean War vets if you were African American or Latino or Hispanic. So people who made their fortunes on the back of racism, using tax dollars, these are the continuing legacies and harms of that arc that goes all the way back to the original sin of slavery.
Thank you, Dr. Mayer. Everyone, please clap for them. Our first partner panel.
Thank you.
Officials again, and we'll hear a Manhattan welcome and Harlem welcome from one. We have Assembly members Zapier from the Bronx. Gibbs from Harlem. We have Anderson from Queens. We have Taylor Darling from Nassau. We have Councilmember-elect Yusuf Salam from Harlem. And here to give us a Harlem is Inez Dickens.
Harlem in the house. They all come out. It should be crowded in here when we're talking about reparations. But I want to thank Joy Bivens. I want to thank the Schomberg for allowing us to host this this evening. As many of you know, that we've had a hard fight, and I know that they had a discussion. Dr. Myers and Matthews both discussed about Christmas addicts. And a lot of our children, the flowers that are cultivated in our garden, don't know who Christmas addicts is. And it's unfortunate because they have a gym right here in the center of Harlem named Schomberg Center for Research. And this is where you can get all of that knowledge about our history. And one other thing, they're talking about the right to vote. Here in New York State, you could not vote up until 1960s without taking a test that you had to pass, where you had to tell what was the amendment number 14 or 12 or 11. Who the heck knew what that was? But yet that was the test that was given, and you could not register to vote right here in New York in the 1960s without taking that test. Now that's sad, because up until then, we allowed them to give us a test that we could not pass, and therefore they stopped us from voting. That was another way of saying, if you don't own the land, you can't vote. So we've got to know our history in which to foster the future, so we know how to battle and fight this thing out. I want to thank all of my colleagues for hosting this. I want to thank Miguel Solange, and of course, James Saunders, who we were in the city council together. So we spoke with me to see that millions of dollars that was built downstairs for high tech, he helped me to do that. That man right there. So I want to thank all of you for being here. Hopefully we will be able to generate an interest to all of the families so that we know what to stand up for. Because if we're not united in this fight to ensure that this commission moves forward, to ensure, and like they said, reparations is not all about dollars. But this country has to first recognize and agree that they owe the black man something. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. So let's get started with the second part of our panel this evening with the local elected officials, who are the people who are really going to put this. Well, first of all, they are the people behind this, so let's give them a round of applause just for that. And second of all, these are the people who are going to advocate for all of us in Albany, in our local communities, right here in Harlem, on Long Island, in Queens, all of the boroughs. These are the people who are going to advocate for this bill. And there's a lot of numbers here. So we've got Assembly Bill 7691 and Senate Bill 1163A. So that's what we're talking about today. So first, and I'll just put the questions out and you can answer them. What does the New York State Reparations and Remedies Commission do?
Well, I first like to thank all my colleagues. And so this legislation creates a commission, 3 appointments for the governor, 3 appointments for the Assembly majority, and 3 appointments for the Senate majority. The commission will go around the state, have public hearings, deliberate and produce a document which describe what reparations will look like in New York State, and then that will be delivered to the legislature. It will be a non-binding report, so the legislature would have to act upon it, but it simply just creates a document in which will be our guiding light of what reparations may look like in New York State.
Direct cash payment.
Let the commission decide. You're going to be the first one at the hearing, right? We want to hear from the people, and it's very important in this conversation.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why nights like tonight are so important. Because you hear exactly what's behind this. Senator Sanders, did you want to jump in?
Our chairwoman said exactly what the bill aims to do, and I just want to go on record and say this fight to even have an opportunity to be here where we had such an incredible bill passed in both houses, you would not even understand the fight. But exactly what our academic experts said earlier, we have to be united in this fight. And I think that this bill allows experts to get into the room, speak to the public, do the research and really figure out what it is that repair to us looks like, sustainable repair to us. That may be a part of it. So I hope you're at the public hearings. Shout out money.
Senator Sanders, did you want to add?
They spoke well. We can go to the next question.
Okay. So if I understand it, we're not getting a check tomorrow.
Well, we have to get the bill signed first. At the end of session, what happened is that we actually passed the bill through the legislature. My man, please, let's have respect for us. All right, let's have respect for each other, right? Give a round of applause if you want respect around this room. I respect you, let's have a conversation. But if we don't get this bill signed, so the Assembly passed the bill, the Senate passed the bill,
Take it to the governor.
and now we are in the process of waiting for the governor to call the bill. And so, now is the time where we advocate to get the bill signed so we can just even begin this conversation. And as alluded from the Assembly member, people have issues with just the mere premise of us analyzing what reparations will look like.
And so in the first part of this tonight, we talked a lot about the history. And we talked about the history here in New York State, and we touched a little bit on California. So if you could speak to what's going on in California as far as reparations are concerned, and then how our outlook or how what we're doing in New York is the same or different.
First, we have to give a lot of respect to the people of California for moving. I should preface that what I'm going to say will be me speaking for me and not me speaking for anybody else. I wonder if New York would have moved in such a deliberative fashion if California had not moved. So a lot of respect to the people of California. We'll also go a step further and say that the beautiful golden state of California, they can handle their own. I think that California will do well for their own. Here in New York, we got to figure out what does this mean for New York.
Yes.
We are the empire state. We can learn from others, but we can do for self here. So we are learning from what they did in California, but there may be some differences, just as there is a left coast and an east coast.
And also, to pull that thread a little bit more, we talked in the first segment historically about reparations in other parts of the world. Is what New York State is looking toward, is that similar, different than what we see in other places around the world? Brazil, for example.
I think that there is a worldwide movement to repair the African the world over. There's a worldwide movement. There's a movement in the Caribbean. There's a movement in Asia. There is a movement in Europe. All of these, in South America, of course, all of these are very worthy movements, and each one builds on each other. However, there will be differences, of course, because there are differences from Asia, from Europe to here. So I think that each one can aid the other, but there must be differences because there were different colonial masters, there were different historical periods that they found themselves in. So the others, thank God for them. Now it's time that New York has moved. New York, I wonder if slavery could have maintained itself without New York State. New York State funded the slavers. New York State insured the slavers. New York State bought the cotton. New York State processed the cotton. New York State shipped the cotton. New York State helped create the ships that enslaved us. New York State has an oversized relationship to the issue of slavery. And not simply slavery, we need to also speak of the American apartheid, Jim Crow, after slavery. It didn't end with slavery, and nor should our call for reparations.
So New York obviously played such a large role in this. So what are the implications for more of a national campaign? As New York goes, so does the country in so many ways. What do you think about a national campaign?
You know, New York is always a beacon of light. Whatever we do in this state, you know, other states look at it, other countries look at it. So, you know, us having this conversation, getting the bill signed by the governor, and then acting upon the commission really is going to send a signal to not only other states, but other localities that this is possible, which is really, you know, amazing.
Oh, okay, let me ask one more time, maybe you came in late. If you have a question, please just raise your hand and write it down, and then we're gonna bring them up, and that way we can ask the entire panel, the electeds, and also the academics, all of our questions, to get more of a rounded answer. I see some more hands over there. So, we were talking about a national campaign. So, if I'm not an elected official, we're not elected officials, what can we do as constituents to get this moving?
You definitely want to contact the governor, you want to contact your local electeds, you want to identify your local electeds first and foremost, and let them know that this is a cause that is very important to you. You want to reach out to local organizations that are on the ground, that are involved in the movement and progression for our people, for Black people, for disenfranchised people who would definitely be a support of reparations. And that's really what it is. We want to mobilize and galvanize everyone and just say this is important because that's what gets attention. If you have any press contacts, let them know that this is something that New York really wants, and right now we're asking for the bill to be signed so the commission can be formed. We get to wait for that time period once the commission's formed for their report, and then we get to take it from there based on the recommendations.
It's passed in both houses.
You said
Take it to
we're
the
waiting
governor.
for the bill to be signed. Like, what can we do? We're waiting for the governor or other people?
Yes.
What are the metrics around that?
If I was a betting man, I'm betting heavily that there are people weighing with the governor telling her not to sign this bill.
But she should sign it.
I'm betting that there are people who have already called and made phone calls and said to the governor, don't sign this bill.
But it's
I think that while we were napping, they were rapping. I think that while we're out here arguing with each other, they are very clear, speaking to the governor, they don't care what bill you came up with. They would be against it. Wouldn't matter what you say, there's a certain group that will be against it no matter what you say. So under those conditions, we need to get up there and we need to weigh into the governor and say, wait a minute, here is what we need. Governor, these votes that you got from a lot of these communities. You owe these communities, and we need to weigh in on that and let her know that.
But it's been signed. All they gotta do is take it to the governor.
What I'm hearing is we need to do what the people who are against this are doing. We need to be vocal. We need to call the governor's office. We need to make it clear that we want this to pass.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely, because at the end of the day, this is not even reparations. I would love to pass a bill that actually was reparations. Unfortunately, there was not the political will to do that. And so this is just one step closer to having that conversation, producing that document, giving us the ammunition so that when we have the ability to talk about it, we can do it. And so this is really, an informal step, because I know out here, all you guys know what you want in your form of reparation, but we have to formalize the process. And so hopefully getting this done will allow us to get the reparations that our community deserves.
And then after that, we're going to have open forums where we can all come and weigh in. Is that how this works?
Yeah, so upon signature from the governor, the commission has 6 months to convene, and then they're required to do public hearings all across the state, every inch of the state, and hear from you, the public. And then they will deliberate and then produce a document. And we put that on a strict timeline because our communities, we can't wait. A lot of these task force and commission bills, what happens is that they convene and then you don't get the report until 4 or 5 years from the point of convening. And so in this conversation, in this bill that we passed, we actually put a timeline so that we can have the report as quickly as possible so that we can act upon reparations.
So you're thinking 6 months for the study?
So, no. 6 months for the commission to convene, and then it's probably gonna be a year and a half for, the public hearings, and then, for them to produce the document.
So that we'll all have a chance to weigh in on exactly what we see this being. So what are the next steps for this state campaign?
So we do have a petition. You can go to the senator's website. There's a petition that individuals can sign. But I just encourage you to reach out to the governor and say that this is important. I think that the topic of reparations to them is a fringe issue. It's a niche issue, but they don't realize it's really a community issue. It's about us. It's about having a conversation of how we can repair our communities, our homes. And so, wherever you are on the persuasion of reparations, we need to have this conversation, and it should not be delayed.
They took it out of the bill.
So, and you can clap for that, yeah?
Involvement, they took it out.
So we're not trying to delay this conversation. We're trying to move ahead like California is moving ahead as well. I feel as if there should be more steps here. Isn't there, to give us a little bit more agency? So just contacting the governor, contacting our local electeds, anything else we can do?
Just like I said, supporting organizations that are on the ground, that have been doing this work, have been doing the research for decades, because there have been a lot of people that have fed into this bill before the bill was created, but we had to do a lot of those steps very much behind the scenes for this to come to fruition. This is years and years in the making, and I won't go into grave detail about last session, but up until the very last second, I did not know if this was going to happen. And to me, it was very telling that we can pass so many bills so quickly, but when it comes to anything that has to do with our advancement, there is a song and dance and so many people who are so involved, because us actualizing our excellence is a lot of people's worst nightmare. And being able to have an equitable space, and that's still kind considering all the free work that we've given to this country. For us to be on an equitable space, people are terrified. Yes. And I've been contacted in the most lewd way. I know our chairwoman was contacted even worse, questioning if we even had a space to represent and push for this. And right there is the key. Keep us divided and nothing is going to happen.
Go a step further. You have a role to play here. You could grab these petitions and take them to your neighborhood. You don't have to wait, just sign something. You can take it to your friends. Go a step further. Why don't you convene this meeting in your community? I will go to every part of this state and speak on this. And if those who know me in this audience, I have never run from a fight in my life, although there are many I should have. We will bring an honest conversation to every single part of this state. If you invite us and have enough people there, I personally will come and sit down with you. Come to grab your petition. This is not a spectator sport. This is something that you need to be on the front line about. Thank you.
Thank you. So what you're saying is if we're a member of a civic organization, if we're a member of a church organization, if we're a member of whatever we do in our communities, a sorority organization, whatever we're doing in our own local communities, bring this into it. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Not only bring it in, have your organization take a position. Have your organization, if you're in church, the church should take a position. If you're in the Girl Scouts should take a position. A Cedric, everybody should take a position because silence is not golden here. Silence is conceding to the enemies of your freedom.
Thank you, Senator. So if you could take a step back for me, you were talking, especially Assemblymember Darling, you were speaking about when you were actually taking this vote. Most of us don't go to Albany. We don't know how this works. Can you walk us through what that was like?
When we were taking the vote? I mean, when it came to the floor?
When it came to the floor.
When it finally came to the floor,
well, when you said finally, so talk to me, start there, like why finally, and then when it actually came. Just paint the picture for us. Uncloak it for us.
Okay, so we have a body of very effective, hardworking individuals, especially in the BPHA caucus. Our chairwoman was able to carry the bill or a similar bill once one of our colleagues left who'd carried it for a very long time. And we had to make some modifications to the bill to make sure we had enough votes for it to pass on the floor. In both the People's House, which is the assembly, the body chairwoman and I serve in, and the upper house, which is the Senate, which is the body that Senator Sanders serves in. So we were going back and forth with edits, but there was just a very long time before we were able to get a bill number, before we were able to get certain things that were required for us to agree on what this bill would look like. So once we finally figured that out, and that was the last week of session, so we're waiting with bated breath. We don't know if this is gonna happen for the first time in history for it to pass in both houses, right? Am I correct? Okay. And when it finally did come to the floor, everybody was present on the floor. We had our friends on the other side of the aisle, and we had our friends on our side of the aisle. And I don't know how long the deliberation or the explanation of votes were, or how long the process on the floor was, but everybody wanted to speak and have their voice on record about this bill. And it was one of the most moving, 4 hours? Okay, 4 hours. And this is at the end of session where we are very tired. and to have something so major saved to the end of session, to me, these were all tactics. And I just said, we have to draw that strength from our ancestors because we have to speak on this. You know, however you feel about it, we have to speak on this because there is no doubt or there's no confusion over the contributions of what African Americans have brought to this country. But there's so much confusion over what we brought to New York because the history, again, who holds the history, who holds the story is what really, they're the ones who get to control the narrative. So we had to do a lot of educating on that day. You know, I laughed because there's a video on my Instagram of me speaking and I didn't like the angle. My neck was very thick, I was very strong. But I said, you know what, that thick neck was necessary for this to show the strength because I really got bigger. Like I had to get bigger to say what I had to say. And I represent a county where everyone does not feel like our contributions need to be acknowledged. I actually had a historian in our county tell us that there were no slaves in Long Island because everyone plowed their own land. And I said, oh, so they had energy out here. I said, no, I don't think that's true. And within 10 minutes, they were able to go back to the archives, white gloves and all, and find that Mary owned Beth. I said, look at that. I was unearthing slavery in like 20 minutes in the middle of Hempstead. So that was great for me and for us in New York to understand slaves existed here. So how can we repair that harm? And that was the process. 4 hours of education, emotions, and everything.
And I just want to give kudos to our speaker.
Assemblymember, if I can, just the last call for questions. If you have any questions, just raise your hand with your cards and we'll bring them up and we'll start with those after the Assemblywoman.
Yeah, and I just want to give kudos to Speaker Hasty, who really convened all of the Black legislators of the Assembly and gave us a space and time to have a thoughtful conversation on this. You know, I appreciate the kudos, but he really wanted to hear from each and every member what they felt about this and how this bill should look like. And after hours upon hours and days of convening, we were able to come together and produce this document that we could all agree on. And then the Senate came, gave suggestions, supported us in that conversation, again, more deliberation. And then finally, we were able to put up a bill on the floor that we could all agree upon and really pass through both houses. So, really kudos to our Senate Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousin, and also our Speaker, Casey.
Thank you, Assembly Member. At this time, I would like to ask Dr. Aaron Mayer and Casey Matthews back up to the stage so we can answer some questions if you're still in the neighborhood.
And then also some of our other colleagues, if they would like to come up as well.
Yes.
Eddie Khalil, excuse me. Assembly Member Gibbs, Assembly Member Anderson, Yusuf. You want to come up? I have a book for you, actually. I want your book. I want you to sign it. So don't leave without signing my book.
Okay. Thank you for joining us on the stage. While they're figuring it out, we'll get to the first question. With the New York State reparations, what is it looking like? Would it be more lineage-based? Would you see it as a cash payment? What is the idea behind it? Or is that what we're going to study?
So that's what we're going to study. The commission would decide all of those questions. Because as electeds, we want to support the work of the people. At the end of the day, it's New Yorkers that should decide what this commission looks like and what that commission produces. So the commission would decide all of that.
Took the people out.
Black New Yorkers.
Anyone who'd like to be on the commission.
Yeah.
I see a lot of people who have input on the commission. I really would suggest first to help us pass the bill. And then we're going to have a process where people can actually submit their resumes so they can be sitting, they could, be chosen, if they're chosen, to sit on the commission.
Dr. Mayer, do you want to weigh in on that as well?
Yes, you know the deep history of slavery, and the question that they'll actually also, what did New York do, what did New York contribute? And I think that as has been articulated, that as one of the original 13 colonies and foundational with regards to the financial institutions, the insurance institutions, the real estate institutions, there's a lot of exposure. But that's not the only point. Again, the harm in institutional racism just did not end with slavery and ended in the Civil War. There were out-migrations from other regions, other parts of the country to the state of New York, and institutional behaviors of racism, bigotry, and bias. Everything from, as I talked about, some real estate barons who redline people of color. So, we want to have as robust an academic conversation, and the thing is that the data is something that you can actually get at. You can absolutely talk about those who were part of the great migrations out of the South to New York, who were redlined and discriminated, and who had adverse opportunities. My grandparents on my Jamaican side, Ellis Island immigrants, they came here. Again, when they came to New York, when they came to...
Okay.
Listen.
Okay, let's let him finish, please. Thank you. All right, let's let him finish, please. Thank you.
Again.
Everyone, please, let's let him finish. Thank you.
You have to look at cohorts of population. Just as they say, when you talk about classes of impacted populations, what are those cohorts, what are those classes of impacted population as they related to the state? If, because of race, they were denied an opportunity, and it's documented, again,
all right, sir.
Again, this is
straight up.
Black Americans from U.S. chattel slavery. Not every one of
All right, so we'll go on to the next question. So why aren't reparations, or why are they? You can clarify for us. Everyone, please. We're going through the questions now. Thank you.
Can I say something real quick? May I? Can I say something real quick? These young men and women on the stage. Yo, brother. call me old. You don't even know me. You don't even know my story. You don't even know my story. Listen, we won't be having this conversation if it wasn't for these men and women on the stage right now.
That's not true.
Let me tell you something. Hold up. Brothers and sisters.
The people
Brothers and sisters.
Everyone, please.
When we have these conversations in Albany, this is what we face. This is what we face. We want to come back to the community and talk to you guys. In order to have this conversation, you needed legislators to bring this particular issue to the forefront.
Take it to the governor.
Here we are.
Hold it down.
All we ask for is respect.
And everyone,
My friends, let me share, may I
And the young brother with that old comment, I'm gonna see him on that one.
May I remind people that you are being videotaped? May I remind people that only the enemies of our people would attempt to break up such a conversation? Only the enemies of our people would attempt to break. I want us to look at the faces of the people who are interrupting because they are siding with the enemy. There's nothing wrong in having a disagreement. There is something wrong about disagreeing right here.
So folks,
You haven't even gotten to the governor yet. She
y'all
is
wouldn't
going
take
to
it.
use these examples against you. Are you doing the work of the enemy? If you're not, then be respectful and you'll get your chance and let other people speak.
So
But
Senator
if you
Sanders,
are intent to do the work of the enemy, continue to make noise.
hang on a second, Senator Sanders. So, ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, I've been at the Schomberg Center quite a while, and I've not seen this. We have discourse, we have conversation with each other, yelling when we've got folks who've given their time to be on the stage. The reason Schomberg Center is having this conversation is that they asked us. They brought it to Harlem. They didn't have to, they could have gone somewhere else. And I wanted this discussion here. I mentioned to you that some of our volunteers who are here in the room, we've been having this discussion amongst ourselves saying, wouldn't it be great to have this discussion? Folks, we all have opinions. It's their time on stage. When it's your time on stage, it'll be another evening. Please show some respect. I'm from the same neighborhood everybody else is. We would not talk to each other this way in the street. Please don't do that in my home. We're going to try again at the panel, and if it does not go well, we're going to close the house down. Please don't do that.
I hope not, but this is a very important fine point. And again, it's always good to have an academic here. You know, yes, it's about slavery. But let me be clear. Unless you can prove that you're a direct descendant of a slave from New York slaves, okay, and some perhaps can, all right? But the point of the matter is, you got to talk about the varying classes and the waves and what have you and the points of impact. These are not things that are just coming off the street. These are things that are definable, knowable, researchable, and again, there are differences, just like there are different classes with greater impact. There are those who have lesser impact. So these are things that are knowable.
thank you, Dr. Mayer. And we're going to go to the next question. I appreciate that. We're talking about reparations, and every year there's a big caucus that happens every February in Albany. So will the topic of reparations be central to the discussion at next year's caucus? And how can we bring the topic front and center during the weekend?
So we've definitely talked to the association, which hosts the weekend, and see what we can do to make this conversation a prevalent conversation during the weekend. That's something that the association would have to decide. But definitely we can uplift it for them.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
Just to add on to the chair, there are dozens, hundreds of different workshops throughout the caucus weekend, and there usually is a workshop on the subject matter that was last year, and there usually is, and that's the point, that we want you all to come up and be a part of that conversation.
And our next question, thank you. How can the idea of reparations be applied to the incarcerated population?
Let him go. I'll yield, if you wish.
Those that are presently and past have been incarcerated are a part, they're a significant part of this, because slavery, the term we think about slavery was hundreds of years ago, but in actuality, we're still in slavery today. So, and those that are formerly incarcerated or presently incarcerated are definitely a part of the enslaved population as we're talking about reparations and what has to be done and shared financially, socially, economically, in order for us as a race, a culture, to benefit from what is actually due us. So definitely, that has to be part of the conversation. We cannot omit those that have been incarcerated presently or formerly have to be part of this discussion, or then we're only talking about a part of it and not the entire entity and institution of slavery in this country.
Thank you. Did you want to add? Another question about grassroots organizations. Are there any working with you on the commission? So, go ahead.
Absolutely. There isn't a swelling up. I personally have spoken to just about every one of the organizations that exist out there. I have great respect for each of these schools of thought that are out there on this issue. Many of these folk have fought for years on this issue. This is the passion that you hear in the audience of people who have fought for years on this issue and feel strongly about it. We applaud their strength. We applaud what they have done. We think that now is time that you need to, I would take that energy and educate us. Yelling in a crowd, it sounds good, but you may want to spend more time sitting down. I absolutely encourage any school of thought to meet with me. You don't have to make noise here. You can meet with me. I invite you to the rock. Come to the edge of the earth, the Rockaway. And we can have conversation there. We need not disrupt meetings when we can talk to one another. Speaking to Africa.
It is a vote to reparations, isn't it?
Assembly member, did you want to add?
Yeah, and definitely, we had a coalition of groups help us with the bill. So remember, the commission hasn't started yet. The bill has to be signed in order for us to have a commission. But when we talk about the bill, the piece of legislation, we had a coalition of individuals helping us, whether it's the media, some of the clips that you saw beforehand, or just talking to legislators, educating legislators, or doing grassroots work in Buffalo, in Syracuse, talking about individuals, talking about reparations. We had a whole coalition helping us, and we invite more people to join the coalition. It's all about unity.
In addition to that, in actuality, this was a bill. Reparations was started by now city council person, but formerly assembly person, Charles Barron. And he and I were on TV.
Shout out to Charles Barron.
New York One. I thank her for allowing us, because the two of us went on New York One to discuss reparations, just the two of us. And we could not get it passed. And that's why it was necessary for Senator John James Sanders and Assemblywoman Megael Solanges to get together and re-edit the original bill that we had put in, and so that it could pass. Because without these two coming together, their minds, we would not have gotten it passed when we did. So I want you to understand that the history is where it was started by Charles Barron and myself and others. Many was just the two of us. But we could not get it passed if it were not for these two taking this fight up and seeing it to the end.
Thank you. So how long, next question,
Hearings. It's very important that your voices are heard because those are the things that the commissioners are going to use and factor in what their decision is going to be.
But it's not only the testimony, it's the surround of people. When the room is packed and you may have 10 people speaking, but there's 1,000 people in the room, that speaks volumes to the governor because it's the black people that made her governor this time because she was in mega trouble without us.
Stop voting them in, yeah.
thank you. The
Let
next,
me just give an academic point. These hearings sound dragged out, but this is critical how our democracy works. Not only testifying, grassroots organizations writing documents, writing, as I said, if you have evidence, local history, pulling that together, entering it in the record. You know, this is not a shouting match, okay? It is a process. How do they get, as I say, the majority get what they want? Is that they follow this process that they created. But the critical piece is that we need to have all of the perspective. I saw a family here says, I'm longtime New York descendants, having that history, that genealogy, testify, put that into the public record. If you're not sure what kind of group, go to your local NAACP, your regional NAACP, form a coalition task force to be at these meetings, testify, enter documents into the public record because that's critical.
and Senator Sanders will come out and speak to your local chapter of the NAACP as well.
And it's also about uncovering that hidden history. In the time that we passed the reparation bill, I've had already 3 families come up to me and tell me that their enslaved family members are buried under a commercial, commercial property. There are African burial grounds all across this state where our ancestors are buried under gas stations, under strip malls, and it's important that we honor those ancestors. And so that might not be direct compensation, but to me, that's ancestral compensation that we need to recognize and give due and give them dignity.
Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just saying, as Dinkins and I was just at the MTA bus depot on 126th Street and First Avenue the other day. We had some ancestors who were simply buried under this bus depot. So New York City decommissioned the bus depot. We're going to have some architects going there. And you want to jump in, Auntie?
East Harlem has a large burial site. There's also one in Central Park. And these are just ones we found. Not to say that there are not many others that exist. There's one, of course, that's become renowned, and that's the one downtown that was about to be sold, if you remember, Senator Sanders, by the city council, was about to be sold if it had not been for then city council person Charles Barron. And so these are different sites that Miguel is talking about when she said that we must recognize our ancestors. All of us have ancestors. The ancestors belong to all of us. We all stand on their bones, their graves, the fight, the terror, the fear, the slavery, the heartache, the heartbreak, the separation of families. We all stand on those shoulders. So please, stand together, united for that. If nothing else, we have a just cause that belongs to all of us.
And I just want to highlight, you said Seneca Village, which is really an important conversation that we need to have in New York State. There was land that was taken away from enslaved people, free people, and that is now called Central Park. And those people were not compensated. They're not even given a proper memorial. And so now we have an opportunity to really have a conversation about how we can make that right. How we can give those individuals remedies and reparations because their land was stolen from them. And now rich people are playing there. And we've never given them compensation for that.
Thank you. And our last question as we wrap things up for the evening. This is very simple, this question. What will reparations success look like?
Vetted the questions. See, this is the reason why we got some grassroots.
It'll look like
On one
lineage.
hand, reparations
to me.
will be decided by a commission which will bring these ideas to the legislature, where those ideas must be voted on by the legislature. But let me deal with it in a different way. It will look like what we fight for. If you fight for it and fight for more, then it will look like it. If you don't fight, none of it will happen. I suggest that we not wait for this commission to begin. I suggest that the people organize themselves, that we start having meetings all over the place. Let's push this commission and move it in a certain way so that no matter what they want to do or deviate, we, the people, can decide which way this thing needs to go. We should not wait for some nameless folk to speak when you can speak to your neighbors. You can grab your friends. You can grab all kinds of people and bring them together. Let us decide what our fate will be and not leave it into the hands of others, no matter how worthy they are.
But I want to add one thing, and this is not a political answer. This is going to be a truthful answer to my village. We're not going to each of us individually get a check for $10. We're not in.
We don't know that.
Who get a check for $10? We don't know that. That's what they're talking about. That's what they're talking about.
Giving her opinion.
And we're not talking about that. See, we're not talking about us each getting a check for $10. Because that's what they're talking about. We're talking about reparations that's due us for slavery.
Who's talking like that?
But it's not, we're not getting a $10 check.
Wait.
Alright.
She's giving her opinion. Her opinion.
We're not accepting that. That's not what we each gonna get. We're not each gonna get a $10 check.
Alright.
And we're not gonna accept that. We've got to band together and understand that once you direct the electeds into what it's to be, then that's what the fight has to be about.
If it's not
You understand what I'm saying? That's what the fight has to be about.
Thank you. Closing.
You gotta share with Haitians and everybody else. It'll be $10.
For me,
Fight has to be about lineage-based reparations.
for me, reparations, for me,
Yes.
it's like redemption. For me, reparation is redemption. To answer your question, as the first formerly incarcerated New York State legislature, and I'm quite sure my brother Yusef Salam can testify to this, as the second male formerly incarcerated city council member, redemption. This is what reparation means to me. So guys, about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, I got elected to the assembly. I served time in prison prior to. Came home and got my life together. When I won the assembly seat, I immediately went to Albany and I started legislating. Started legislating on pieces of legislation that would help formerly incarcerated, help those who are incarcerated. And then when my Madam Chair said, hey, we're working on a reparation bill, and my rap family can tell you, release Asian people from prison, I immediately halt my legislation for formerly incarcerated. Because this reparation bill is so important. And if you think about all the people, all the groups, all the organizations, in the many of years, these groups and organizations of people try to put this particular legislation together, it just didn't materialize. But in Albany, I see we had an opportunity. It was a lot of backbiting, a lot of fighting, but we all came together on common language. And we said to ourselves, wow, we have an opportunity to pass a bill that will simply start a commission. Now, if this was my panel tonight, we'd have been talking about reparations. Because every time we talk about reparations, we talk about money. We just simply talking about a commission to study the effects of slavery and how much would that reparation or what that reparation would look like. A simple conversation, a simple commission of 9 individuals elected by the Assembly, the Senate, and the Governor to simply study.
You need 3 grassroots?
the reparations. Now, my colleagues encouraged, invited, even somewhat begged you guys to get involved. Let's start these series of hearings in your communities. Let's do it. Let's get these little town hall going. I mean, we here. She came only 3 hours from Long Hours. I'm from Long Island. He came 2 hours from Queens. Khalil's 2 hours from Queens. Inez and I are here, but they came here just to talk to us about what we're trying to do in Albany and possibly get some positive feedback. Now I know in conversations, the Republicans say, hey, this guy shouldn't be serving. He served time in prison. He shouldn't be up there. It was going to be back and forth. I get it. But let's do it respectfully. Let's talk about it. We here just to ask you guys, hey, what do you think about the commission? I thought the argument tonight would be, who's going to be the 9 individuals? Who are you going to pick? Pick me,
Yes.
Let's not even think about the money part right there, because we're way off that. Right now, we just at a commission phase to talk about reparations. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Assemblymember Anderson, closing thoughts?
Thank you so much, Gail. Thank you so much, Gail.
All right.
And again, the question...
Ladies and gentlemen, we're all on the same side here. We're all on the same side here. And that side is studying. So, go ahead. Assemblymember Anderson.
So, guys, come on. So the question was, what does reparations look like, a successful reparations?
What is success?
What does success look like? I think it's a combination of a lot of the ideas that we've heard here in the audience today and across the spectrum of the different reparations conversations that we've been having, right? There's no perfect or right way to heal the harm, whether it's harm directly or lineage-based harm, of individuals who have suffered centuries of trauma. But the best thing that we can do during that process is take a combination of all of the ideas, because folks are not wrong in here. Folks are not wrong about their views. They've studied this for so long.
We know lineage
and
based is right. We know.
And so they've studied this for a long time. And so it's really important for us to look at a combination, whether it's a combination of harm, whether it's a combination of lineage, whether it's a combination of someone, I think this brother here had on a creative shirt the last time. He said, there you go. Folks have said land. These are creative and interesting ideas that the commission will be responsible for analyzing. And so we want to make sure that what success looks like is hearing from these folks, right? And making sure that each and every one of them who are speaking loudly here, as we're just trying to explain the legislation and explain the process, are twice as loud, but respectful and organized in the commission meetings, because these will go into the New York State public record forever.
Channeling that energy.
We want to show the folks that we can do this in a courteous way, in a way that gets everyone's idea across. Because again, when we start and begin, this is preparation for us to begin to testify at the commission hearings, and we want to show the record that's going to be in the state forever, that we can have agreements, disagreements, but we can come together with a combination of ideas that help us ultimately heal the harm that was in slavery and chattel slavery in the state of New York.
Thank you, Assembly Member. We're going to hear from the caucus chair for closing.
Leading a caucus of
only have a few minutes left.
There's a caucus of 76 people, many different ideas, many different concepts, but they want us divided. They want us to be divided. They want us to fight before even the commission starts, to give an excuse to veto the bill. We have an opportunity to have the whole pie. We have the opportunity to have everything, to honor our ancestors, to make sure that we fix the harm, and to make sure that we close the economic wealth gap for our communities. So I want to make sure that we are all having this conversation united. I really appreciate everyone being here today. It shows the strength of the Black community. That we can come here and have a conversation, use our energy wisely, and making sure that we can empower our communities every single facet, every single way. So I thank you so much whether you're for it or against it, you're here and you're having that conversation. So I thank you, everyone, and this is great. This is just wonderful. I'm so excited.
Thank you, Assembly Member.
I want to thank our moderator, Gail, for trying to do it. I want to, of course, thank Ms. Schomberg for allowing us into the house. To all of the panelists who have done so well, I especially want to thank you all. I invite anybody who has a question to meet with me in my part of town, and we can talk on and on. Thank God for all of you. Go on. 40 acres and a Tesla.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out this evening. Get home safely.
40 acres and a Tesla.